You think I'd be foolish enough to come through the door?
I've been flanking you this whole time. If you're not familiar with flanking, first off, how are you not familiar with flanking? Do you just stick your head in the dirt and ignore the world when it goes around you? And secondly, it works like this. Let's say we have a combat going on between Flames McGillicuddy the Fire Elemental and the party. If one side is ever fully sandwiched by two characters of the opposing side, then those characters get advantage against the creature they're ganging up on. And it goes both ways too. Let's say Inferno Jones joins the fight, and he plops himself right here. These two fire elementals now gain flanking against this party member, and they get advantage on their attack rolls against her. I don't like it. But who cares what I think, right? Who cares what I like? I'm just a random YouTuber on the internet, and that is how your opinion should be. You should not just trust what I say because it's what I say. Some people are diehard fans of this rule exactly as it's written. And maybe, just maybe, flanking will be great for your table. All I want to do here is tell you why I don't use it and give you a few counterpoints so that you can think over the pros and cons before you actually end up adding it to a game of yours. The two biggest reasons people add flanking to their games seems to be that A, they want to add some strategy behind your movement in combat, and B, they think it just makes sense. Like, you can't protect your back and your front at the same time, so this rule just adds in maintaining verisimilitude. I love the idea behind giving movement meaning. The 5e system just doesn't really have a lot to make movement a tactical decision during your turn. You could argue attacks of opportunity are kind of meant to do that, but it's just not a mechanic with a lot of depth. If you add in flanking, then there's more thought behind movement than simply taking the shortest path up to people and hitting them. While I adore this thought conceptually, I think it fails when it's put into practice. Actually, I think flanking can simplify the game and make people less strategic when they play. I've been in a lot of games that use flanking, and it feels like 9 times out of 10, it's less a tactical decision as it is a yes or no question. Do I have enough movement to flank? If yes, then I do. If no, then I don't. You replace the boring, I take the shortest path to get into range non-decision with the equally not a decision of, I take the shortest path to get flanking. Let's try and break down why that is. I think the main problem is simply 5e as a system doesn't have a lot of ways to punish movement. Yes, there's the aforementioned attacks of opportunity, but quite frankly, I think attacks of opportunity are a little bit overrated. It's a rant for a different video, can't get into it right now. And more importantly, they don't do anything to a creature that's adjacent to you. They punish, they don't stop, but they punish a creature that's running past you or leaving a fight with you. But you don't need to do that to get flanking. As soon as you get adjacent to a creature, you can start circling around them, and there is no risk. And creatures will do this. Oh boy, they will run up to each other and just start circling around each other to get flanking. Because, well, quite frankly, getting advantage is really good. It's really nice to have, and using your movement to get it is really easy. 5th edition's design aims to make D&D a lot simpler than it used to be. One of those changes they made for simplicity's sake was to cut out all the extra math and numbers you would add to your rolls based off of whatever various benefits you'd have. For instance, in 3.5, dwarves used to get a +2 bonus to their saves against poison. They also got a +1 bonus to attacks against orcs and goblinoids, and there were like 5 or 10 other bonuses you'd have similar to this that you'd have to math out and keep track of. So 5th edition implemented advantage and disadvantage, a simple, easy to remember, one-stop shop bonus to hand out whenever somebody should have the upper hand on a situation. You don't have to remember that dwarves get a +2 save You don't have to remember that dwarves get a +2 bonus to their saves against poison anymore, because they simply make those saves with advantage. While I love this simple system, and it speeds up the game so much, one of its drawbacks is that advantage is the only bonus 5e is designed for you to be handing out to players. And it is a redundant mechanic. There's no extra benefits for getting advantage multiple times. So when you make the one benefit you're able to hand out more easily achievable using just your movement, it can sort of step on the toes of other parts of the system. There are entire spells whose primary or secondary purpose is to give your attack rolls advantage. Hiding, shoving creatures to the ground, certain magic items, entire class abilities like the Vengeance Paladin's Vow of Enmity, Battlemaster maneuvers such as Distracting Strike, Fainting Attack, and of course, thinking outside of the box and coming up with a unique solution to get a leg up on your opponent. All of these sorts of things can give you advantage. All of these methods of gaining advantage use either some kind of resource, like your action, bonus action, or spell slots, or other class feature resources, or at the very least, they just ask you to get creative, to get into the game and start thinking. All of these things take more effort than simply using your movement. And if you can get the same benefit by simply using your movement, all these alternate ways to gain advantage get an indirect nerf, and people are bound to stop using them as much because they don't need to use them as much. So depending on the table, tactical decision making can actually drop, because if you're giving people multiple ways to come to the same conclusion, most people are going to use the simplest route to get to that conclusion. I do think this kind of issue gets partially fixed if you do other things to incentivize thinking about using your movement more tactically and or restricting or punishing movement. If you end up playing on wide open battle maps all the time, I think flanking is never going to be more than a yes or no question. It's just too easy. But if you do have the time to create or find maps that are more narrow, or have more verticality to them, or have more walls, they utilize the cover system more, that way you incentivize people to get cover, and you incentivize ranged characters to reposition, if you create battle maps that have hazardous areas, if you create combats that have alternate objectives, like trying to chase down and kill a VIP before he escapes. The party needs to escape themselves, a capture the flag kind of get the MacGuffin game, trying to get to a certain area in a certain amount of rounds, or stay in an area for a certain amount of rounds. Any and all of these things can give good movement an impact in your games, and make movement more of a decision point. And I think that in this environment, flanking would be less of a constant and more of a decision. It can be pretty hard to maintain that environment in every fight all the time, though, and you definitely don't need to add flanking for those other methods of incentivizing movement to work. I think they work really, really well on their own. And then, if you start there before adding flanking, you can kind of keep advantage in your back pocket and hand it out as more of a special reward and make it a less common thing. But I do think it still makes flanking better. On to the topic of maintaining verisimilitude. I'm gonna be honest. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when people add or remove things from games simply because it makes sense. Don't get me wrong. I do believe it is important to do things to maintain your suspension of disbelief. I don't think you should avoid doing things you feel like you need to do to make sure your world feels logical. There's a lot of things that make sense in the real world that don't make sense in D&D, and vice versa. Because ultimately, D&D is a game. It cannot have rules to cover every single possible scenario that could come up in our imaginations. If it tried, it'd be a complicated, boring mess, and nobody would want to play it. At the end of the day, no matter how you slice it, you have to make concessions for the game part of the game. Everybody will have different places for when and where they feel like you need mechanical limits to do that, though. Each person is going to have their own unique boundaries for what breaks verisimilitude and what's okay to just hand wave. I feel like flanking is a weird one to get hung up on. There is so much to D&D combat that is an imperfect mirror to reality. There are lots of little things that we have to explain ourselves, that we have to decide how it works narratively. Like how everyone has to occupy their perfect little 5 foot by 5 foot square, and no one is allowed to get an inch closer. If you were to build a D&D shield wall, it would be the whitest damn shield wall in all of history. But the game was built using a square grid, and 5 foot squares makes for very easy math. Or like how we all have an identical amount of movement speed for the majority of us, and that's defined by your race. Little suspect, don't you think? And select few of us can use our bonus actions to move exactly 50% faster than everyone else. I get that several people are going to feel like flanking is very different from those two examples I gave and the many more unmentioned examples that are out there. I just personally don't see why this one's different. I have heard the arguments. I just don't feel their weight, you know? It just, for me, doesn't matter. In my head, it doesn't make any sense that in a position like this, these two characters get advantage. But if we add in 3 more party members, and now all of a sudden, Flames McGillicuddy is being completely dogpiled in a 5-on-1 fight, it is still only those two characters on either side that get advantage. Real life combat is incredibly complex, and situations change moment to moment. Sometimes it'd be a worse position to have a dude in front of you and a dude behind you. Other times, it would be worse to have four people coming straight towards you. It just depends on the specific situation. Well, I mean, in a real life scenario, you are dead in both instances, but I think you get my point. For me, flanking actually starts to break down verisimilitude a little bit. I can handwave fighting off multiple opponents by saying, well, 5e is designed to deliver a heroic fantasy, which it is. You can absolutely veer away from that. I'm not saying you can't, but that is the intent in its design. Because of that, I often see combat as more like movie fight scenes, martial arts scenes, where people take on multiple opponents with ease, and I see them a lot less like a medieval battle. But when you start to add in a mechanic that questions that line of thinking, I start to question why we don't use flanking in way more scenarios. If you want to have a horde rule for fighting groups of enemies, hell yes, go for it. I think that sounds like it could be very fun. I just don't think flanking does a very good job at accomplishing that, and I think you could probably homebrew something better, so I encourage you to get creative. I would be an absolute fool not to bring up the common homebrew rule people change with flanking. They swap out the bonus of advantage with flanking for instead a +2 bonus on your attack rolls. That way, all the other ways of getting advantage still shine, and it's not too powerful, but it's still a good enough incentive for you to want to try and flank people when you can. Honestly, I don't have any good counterpoints for this version of the rule. It does go against 5e's super simple design philosophy a little bit, but it's only one version of an additive bonus. There's not a lot of those in the game, +2 is not very hard of math to do, and I think it is a much more appropriate reward for flanking. I don't think it really helps with the whole tactical movement kind of thing. It still kind of becomes a bit of a yes or no question a lot of the times, but I still think it's way more appropriate. The only reason I don't use this version of the rule is the number one reason I think everybody shouldn't use any rule, and that's that I forget to use it all the time. I don't know why, but for some reason I just cannot remember to apply the +2 bonus, so I binned it because I was sick of all those various, oh, that was actually a 19 to hit, can we go back, and those sorts of conversations that pop up. Don't want to deal with them.
Thomas Fitch.
Flames McGillicuddy?
It is I. Tell me, do you know how to end this video?
No. No, I don't.